On this Tuesday, the National Assembly passed a controversial media reform bill that would revamp the governance of public broadcasters, with the ruling Democratic Party leading its passage after a day-long filibuster by the main opposition People Power Party. A task force designed to craft a mid to long-term economic growth strategy under the Lee Jae-myung administration held its first meeting on Tuesday, where the finance minister stressed that the core of its growth strategy must be business-friendly. Consumer prices in South Korea went up more than 2% for the second straight month in July, driven by higher costs of processed food and seafood. Tensions are escalating at the National Assembly as a filibuster by the opposition comes to a close, now only for another to begin. At the heart of the standoff is a media reform bill pushed by the ruling party. Our Moon Hae-ryun has our top story.
A 24-hour-long filibuster launched by the opposition People Power Party came to an end Tuesday afternoon after the ruling Democratic Party passed a motion to close debate. The PPP initiated the filibuster in an attempt to stall the passage of a contentious media reform bill, which the ruling party introduced at Monday's plenary session. Under National Assembly rules, a filibuster can be forcibly ended only after 24 hours have passed and at least 3/5 of sitting lawmakers, 180 members, vote in favor of doing so. The threshold was met and the DP immediately followed up by passing the media reform bill, where 178 lawmakers voted in favor and 2 against of the 180 votes cast. The PPP did not participate in the vote. The media reform bill is one of 3 controversial legislative proposals aimed at overhauling governance structures at South Korea's public broadcasters. The DP claims the reform would reduce political influence over broadcaster leadership, while the PPP warns it could undermine press freedom.
To boost press freedom and independence, the bill makes CEO appointments more transparent and democratic. The 3 broadcasting control bills can be seen as a prelude to the dictatorship of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Before long, they will take control of the general programming cable channels in the same way, even though those are not included for now.
The remaining 4 bills on the agenda, including 2 other media reform bills, the so-called Yellow Envelope Bill aimed at protecting unionized workers, and a revision of the Commercial Act, will carry over into the August session, with a plenary vote likely scheduled for later in the month. The PPP has vowed to continue its resistance by launching filibusters against each of the remaining bills, with a second filibuster already underway as of Tuesday evening, after the next media reform bill was introduced. Despite continued resistance, the ruling party is pressing ahead, signaling more legislative standoffs in the weeks to come. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The president's office says it'll seek to advance ties with Beijing based on its firm alliance with Washington. The statement shared earlier on this Tuesday follows a comment by Foreign Minister Jo Hyun in an interview with the Washington Post, during which he referred to China becoming, quote, somewhat problematic with its neighbors. The top office claims Jo's remarks sought to reaffirm a commitment to constructive ties with Beijing for regional peace and prosperity despite the differences. South Korea's Prime Minister Kim Min-seok has called last week's tariff deal with the U.S. a meaningful outcome, despite some challenging conditions. Presiding over a cabinet meeting on Tuesday in place of President Lee Jae-myung, who is currently on vacation, Kim thanked ministers for securing what he described as a key interest for the country's agriculture and livestock industries. This appears to echo the Korean government's stance that it did not concede to further opening its rice and beef markets to U.S. imports. The Prime Minister also called on relevant ministries to swiftly implement emergency response measures in areas at risk of heavy rainfall. A new task force made up of top government officials and corporate leaders launched its first meeting today to chart a strategic map to tangible economic growth. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
Deputy Prime Minister for Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul says businesses are at the core of the Lee Jae-myung administration's growth vision, which seeks, quote, real growth. He was speaking Tuesday as the new Growth Strategy Task Force held its first meeting with coup leading, joined by top officials and business leaders, including SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, who also heads the Korea Chamber of Commerce.
We now need to focus on more fundamental economic growth. I believe the next 5 years are Korea's last real opportunity to transition into a super innovative economy.
One key agenda item was easing legal risks for companies. The government plans to reduce criminal liability for CEOs, including in breach of trust cases, and shift towards fines and civil compensation. Minor violations without intent or gross negligence could be exempt from criminal charges altogether. But penalties for serious offenses such as unfair trading or safety violations will be strengthened. The task force also reviewed the outcome of the recent Korea-US tariff deal. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan said the agreement eased uncertainty for exporters, especially in autos, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, and helped preserve Korea's competitiveness in the US market, which accounts for nearly 20% of Korean exports. Even if new tariffs are introduced, Korea will retain most favored nation treatment, ensuring it's not disadvantaged compared to Japan or the EU. Officials also again confirmed no new concessions were made on beef or rice, though future talks could address quarantine procedures such as for U.S. apples. Chairman Choi Tae-won welcomed the deal but urged the government to follow through on the details and ensure both sides maximize investment synergy. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Inflation here in South Korea last month rose above 2% for the second month in a row on higher costs for processed food and seafood. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young has this report.
Korea's consumer prices saw an increase in the 2% range in July for the second straight month. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 2.1% in July year-on-year. Inflation had remained above the Bank of Korea's 2% target for 4 consecutive months through April, subsequently seeing a dip in May before edging up again in June.
While the rise in agricultural, livestock, and fishery product prices expanded due to heat waves and heavy rain, the slowdown in the pace of increases for personal services, excluding dining out, alongside a shift to a decline in petroleum prices, led to a 0.1 percentage point decrease from the previous month.
Prices of processed food products jumped over 4% due to factory price increases, adding 0.35 percentage points to July's overall inflation. Agricultural product prices edged down 0.1%, however, with a notable soaring of watermelon prices by over 20%. The agency noted that extreme heat and heavy rainfall resulted in unfavorable supply conditions, while demand rose sharply. Prices of seafood products rose over 7%, while mackerel prices climbed more than 12%. The agency points to a decline in catches caused by rising sea temperatures. Prices of livestock grew 3.5%, including a significant increase in domestic beef, which is highly sought after thanks to livelihood recovery consumption coupons distributed by the government. In contrast, oil prices fell 1%, reversing an increase in the previous month amid falling international crude prices. During a review of price trends on the same day, the Bank of Korea noted that prices of farm produce are expected to rise rapidly due to unfavorable weather conditions. It pledged to closely monitor the inflation path in response to high uncertainties surrounding external conditions. The central bank also added that a significant slowdown in price growth could occur this month, affected by planned bill discounts and other services by major mobile carriers. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
South Korea is facing a summer of extremes, with scorching heat waves followed by intense downpours. Now, experts say there is a reason behind this. Our Park Hyo-bin has the details.
This July was one of the hottest months on record in South Korea, but it was also one of the most devastating in terms of rainfall. According to a Korea Meteorological Administration report on Tuesday, the country's average temperature last month was 27.1 degrees Celsius, the second highest since precise records began in 1973. There were 14.5 days categorized as heat wave days with temperatures exceeding 33 degrees, the third highest on record. The extreme heat triggered a surge in heat-related illnesses. The emergency authorities responded to over 2,400 emergency calls related to heat stroke and other conditions in July, up more than 140% from the same time last year. Heavy rain has also battered parts of the country. Mid-July saw rainfall double the seasonal average, with over 240 millimeters falling nationwide, the fourth heaviest on record for that period. This extreme mix of heat and rain forced the government to activate both its heatwave and heavy rain Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters for the second year in a row. Since the task force was established in 2019, this is only the second time both systems have run simultaneously. Experts say there's a reason behind these extreme weather patterns.
This summer, a strong North Pacific high brought in hot, humid air, while another high from Tibet expanded overhead, trapping heat over the Korean peninsula. At the same time, cold air from the north clashed with this heat, creating intense rain clouds and heavy downpours lately.
The impact is already being felt. Last Sunday, over 140 millimeters of rain fell in an hour in Muan-gun County, Jeollanam-do Province, leaving one person dead and causing widespread flooding. And on Tuesday, most of the country still remains under heat advisories or warnings. Experts recommend staying hydrated and limiting outdoor activity during peak daytime heat.
To stay safe during heat waves, drink plenty of water regularly and avoid going outside during the hottest hours. It's better to go out in the early morning or evening.
With up to 120 millimeters of rain forecast for central regions on Wednesday, authorities are urging residents to stay alert and take precautions. Park Hyobin, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has pledged to efforts to support the journey to healing from the atomic bombings on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago on this month. Taking to Facebook on this Tuesday, he also conveyed his deepest condolences to the victims and their families. Tens of thousands of Koreans were among those killed or left with lasting health consequences. He also made reference to South Korea's Special Act on the Support for Korean Atomic Bomb Victims enacted in 2017, calling it a practical foundation for assistance, but acknowledged that more needs to be done. The body of a North Korean man found on the shore of Incheon City's Seongmo-do Island in late June will be cremated here in South Korea. This is according to Seoul's Unification Ministry and follows North Korea's failure to respond to South Korea's earlier proposal for the body transfer via the truce village of Panmunjom at 3 p.m. today on Tuesday. Pyongyang has remained silent. U.S. President Donald Trump is ramping up pressure on India over its oil trade with Russia. As Washington pushes for a ceasefire in Ukraine, tariff threats are emerging as a part of a broader strategy to tighten the screws on Moscow. Our Pyongyang has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on India just days before a 25% reciprocal tariff is set to take effect on August 7th and the U.S. set ceasefire deadline between Russia and Ukraine of August 8th. In a post on social media, Trump accused India of making huge profits from buying and reselling Russian oil, while turning a blind eye to how many people are dying in Ukraine, saying he would be substantially raising the tariffs paid by India to the U.S. The move is widely viewed as part of a dual strategy, pressuring India while indirectly targeting Russia by going after one of its key oil customers.
So what he said very clearly is that it is not acceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia.
In an official statement, Indian spokesperson Randir Jaiswal said the targeting of India was unfair and unreasonable, explaining that India had turned to Russian oil only after traditional suppliers redirected shipments to Europe following the Ukraine conflict. He also pointed out that the U.S. still imports chemicals and minerals from Russia for its nuclear and EV industries, and that India will take all necessary steps to safeguard its national interest and economic security. Russia, for its part, dismissed the moves. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said no tariff wars or sanctions can halt the natural course of history, adding that Russia will deepen ties with the global south and resist the unlawful unilateral sanctions. Meanwhile, U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is scheduled to visit Moscow on August 6th, possibly to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, a move seen as an attempt to push for progress on a ceasefire. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
And Russia says it will no longer follow a missile ban agreed with the U.S. during the Soviet era. And meanwhile, NATO has announced new weapons support for Ukraine. Our Choi Soo-hyung reports.
Russia says it will no longer be bound by a treaty on the deployment of intermediate-range missiles. On Monday local time, the Russian Foreign Ministry claimed the U.S. has been deploying intermediate-range missiles in Europe and Asia. Moscow said the move is a response to new threats. The INF Treaty, signed in 1987 between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, banned the production, testing and deployment of ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. In 2019, during U.S. President Donald Trump's first term, Washington pulled out of the agreement, arguing Moscow had long been violating the treaty. Russia denied accusations of violations, continuing to hold back on developing missiles banned under the treaty. Moscow's statement on Monday followed President Trump's order, issued 3 days before, to reposition 2 U.S. nuclear submarines in response to the deputy head of Russia's Powerful Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev's remarks about the risk of war between Washington and Moscow. Medvedev also warned an ex to expect further steps tying the Foreign Ministry's announcement to what he called NATO countries' anti-Russia policy. NATO is stepping up its support for Ukraine, starting with the Netherlands. The alliance plans to purchase U.S.-made weapon systems. Valued at around $579 million, the aid package will include missiles for the Patriot air defense system.
The Dutch are just the first of many. You're going to see a series of announcements in the coming weeks. You know, when we announced this facility that allowed our NATO allies to buy U.S. equipment and provide that to Ukraine for their defense, we had a lot of our allies raise their hand and line up.
Ukraine has also continued its offensive, striking 5 Russian fighter jets in Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed Ukrainian forces are also facing mercenaries from China, Pakistan and Africa. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is demanding at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into Gaza as a precondition for returning to negotiations with Israel. But Israeli Prime Minister says he will convene his security cabinet this week to discuss how to instruct the military to proceed in the enclave to meet all of his war goals. Lee Seung-ja has more.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is open to restarting peace talks with Israel. However, the precondition to returning to negotiations is the entry of at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into the Gaza Strip. According to Al Jazeera, Gaza officials report that over 22,000 aid trucks are currently waiting outside the enclave, while an average of just 84 trucks have been allowed in daily since Israel eased restrictions on July 27th. Humanitarian organizations have warned that at least 600 trucks per day are required to meet basic needs. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that 6 more people, including a child, had died from starvation in the previous 24 hours, bringing the total number of starvation-related deaths since the start of the conflict to 181, including 94 children. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that he would convene his security cabinet this week in order to discuss how his military will proceed in Gaza and meet all his war goals.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve all our war objectives: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these three objectives, all of them without exception.
Meanwhile, according to a report by Axios on Monday, more than a dozen House Democrats have signed a letter calling on the Trump administration to formally recognize a Palestinian state. The latest push signals a renewed effort among some U.S. lawmakers to support Palestinian statehood, with at least one Democrat planning to introduce a pro-statehood resolution in Congress. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
It was hot today with heatwave warnings across the country. The daytime temperature rose to 33 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 35 degrees in Daegu. Tomorrow it will rise up to 28 degrees in Seoul with rain during the day. Heavy rain is expected tomorrow, especially the central regions. More than 120 millimeters of rain is expected in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, more than 100 millimeters in the Chungcheong-do provinces, and 30 to 80 millimeters in the Seoul metropolitan area. Please take extra precautions. Morning will start warm tomorrow at 27 degrees in Seoul and Busan, 24 degrees in Chuncheon. Daily highs will go up to 28 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 34 degrees in Gyeongju. This rain will mostly stop on Thursday morning and tropical nights will cool down from Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.